Well, it's great to be back. Cell Surgical, one of the, for me, the top conferences in the country every year. I love being here, love sharing new data, new knowledge, new clinical experiences with you. And in the short 30 minutes that I have, I always come with at least an hour of information and knowledge and experience I want to share. So I'll be really brief on the intro. So what we're going to talk about is a real passion of mine is cell senescence, senolytics, and application of peptides into these programs that I've been developing for, probably a decade. That's just a disclaimer. What we're going to do is we're going to look at cell senescence, the phenotype, the SASP cell, the secretory cell, which ones are good, which are bad, which ones serve us well, what type of senescent cells that build up in the body that accelerate and contribute to inflammation and premature aging and diseases of aging. So this goal, or the slide of goals, is really expanded into what we're going to be able to cover today. But I highlighted the peptides that I think are extremely important and can be very effective in a successful program of a longevity program. One of the other things I noticed, I highlighted is called immunosenescence and maybe the master switch. There's more and more literature out there looking at what drives cell senescence, where may it start, or what may be controlling cell senescence in every system of the body. And it makes sense that the immune system, the health of the immune system and immune vigilance probably has a very key and powerful paracrine effect, we'll say, in longevity and influencing cell senescence in other systems in the body. So this is really my secret sauce. I stripped everything out there. These are the steps that I use, that I've developed over the years to assess a patient, understand at any age how to personalize a longevity program or a senolytic program for that patient that helps prevent the onset of cell senescence. And if we have cell senescence, how do we rid them of the body effectively? And are there any effective therapies? So we start out with biomarkers of aging, and I'll expand that in a second. And we move into viral illnesses, occult viral illnesses. And I know Dr. Joe Raphael, is going to give a wonderful presentation on hidden viral illnesses and the impact it has on telomere length. So I've learned from this pandemic that there are various antivirals that I can use, that I've used in effectively treating this disease of the pandemic, but also hopefully treating hidden viral illnesses that accelerate aging in the body. And if we look at, for example, CMV, there's 50% of the population is positive for CMV. And if we do a cross-section of those patients and we look at telomere length, they're notably shorter than patients that are not infected with an occult virus. And then we move into SASP cell elimination versus prevention of new onset of cell senescence, and then a little focus on mitochondrial health. And then at the end of my programs, if we want to employ STCs, that's what our three-letter agency likes us to call them now, structural tissue components, when we're talking to patients. So it's meaningless to me, it's meaningless to the patient, but that's what I term them. And they would be stem cells, exosomes, growth factors, et cetera. So here's an expanded look at my program. And I just gave this talk 2 months ago at American Academy. And I gave them this slide basically. And I said, here, it's yours. It's my secret sauce. You can have it because you know what? By the time I give this talk again, it'll be different. And it already is different. We've already added several things into these protocols that I didn't have or have come to the fore, and I use more effectively now in my programs than I did 2 months ago. So that gives us some insight into, we're really peeling the onion, if you will, on senolytics and the science of senolytics and how to slow the aging process. We're just in our infancy, and we always monthly, new ideas, new concepts, new hypotheses come to light, and then you assess them and build them into, or you see if they're effective and noteworthy build them into your programs. So I expanded a little bit, but know that when we look at viral illnesses, I'll back up a second, LO37, I'm not going to review today due to lack of time or the time constraints. And then we'll look at FOXO4-DRI, which is really a research peptide that is available by some pharmacies if you decide to use them in your programs. But that's a pure senolytic utilizing P53 and inducing apoptosis in a senescent cell. Then we get into cell senescent prevention. The immunopeptides, TA1, TB4, are thymic peptides that decrease in the human body as we go throughout the decades of life, as we age. So if we can replete them or replace them and manage them, we can improve immunovigilance and manage cell senescence, the number, more effectively. We'll look at GHRPs or secretagogues and the impact that growth hormone has on aging, or maybe even reversing aging, and then GLPs, which have become liraglutide, for example, or semaglutide, are very effective in as a preventive senopreventive. Then look at two mitochondrial peptides, SS31 and MOD-SC. Note that there are many other therapies that I utilize in these steps as I employ them in my patient population. And know that these are changeable. You can use this any way you want, develop your own programs, look at my program and say, I don't agree with some of it, I don't agree with any of it, I agree with all of it. But this is what works for me in my, my professional career and clinically when we apply them to patients. And it's all obviously backed up by scientific literature, finding the safest, most effective therapies. So the rest of that protocol, and I just want to just point out that I do a conference every year. I'm very fortunate to have, as Sean mentioned, a nice, I own a winery out in California. I don't know what the hell I was thinking, but the estate is a wonderful estate to have a conference. And the rest of my senolytic programs I review every year. We have 2 conferences a year, and I'll be presenting these data again, or this talk again in August this year, but it'll be about a 4-hour talk instead of a 30-minute talk. So what is aging? It's loss of homeostasis. It's loss of function and structure of systems in the body, mostly driven by cell senescence, influenced by genetics, metabolism, lifestyle, stress, environment, toxins, etc. Now, we're not going to expand into lifestyle, but we know that stress, in my opinion, and cortisol are probably, the hidden killer, one of the most detrimental aspects of these cornerstones of life that impact cell senescence and aging. And here's a great example. I'll use this for an anecdote. A patient of mine, I have a lot of pros athletes in my practice in Dallas. And not too long ago, I had a patient come in, and he was free agent. And I said, well, how old are you? He's actually in the NFL. And he goes, I'm 28. Okay. So I said, do you perform? How's your physical performance, exercise performance? How's your 50-meter compared to when you were 18? Would you have the same performance? Hell no, I don't. I said, well, here, take a look at this slide. You started aging, as you know, probably before birth, right? I mean, we start shortening telomeres in utero. We start changing our epigenetic expression of aging. Even on day 1, that methylation starts. But that is the early onset of DNA damage, mitochondrial damage, culminating in when we look at the real onset of, in my opinion, epigenetic expression of aging, or looking at markers of aging, around age 25. So he's already well on his way to some aspect of aging, probably DNA damage first, then mitochondrial dysfunction, and telomeres start to shorten, and then we have a buildup of senescent cells. And over time, after our immune system peaks in our 20s, what happens? We have a bimodal curve, for example, in cancer. Kids don't have a developed immune system. We have a early onset of, incidence of cancers in young people. And then later in life, when we lose our immunovigilance and we have immunosenescence, cancer actually becomes more and more prevalent, as you know. So here's a great example. Guy's only 28 years old. What did I do? I said I placed him on an NAD protocol. He went out, He called me. He killed it. He signed. And he's actually now on active roster now. So cell senescence. Everybody knows what cell senescence is by now. It's cell cycle arrest. It's a Hayflick phenomenon where cells can only reproduce or make another cell. And at some point in time, it stops making new cells or creating new cells. Why do we have this? Well, we inherited this from our ancestors. They're DNA damage checkpoints. The idea is if this cell is starting to go bad, let's not let it replicate. And that is why we end up with all these zombie cells, and patients love to hear zombie cells, or they don't forget that word, they don't forget that term. But we know that one of the biggest reason why is we have cell cycle arrest and to prevent it from becoming a cancer cell. The problem is as the senescent cells, due to this phenomenon, increase in number, they're going to go bad. And that's where we head into SASP cells, and I'm going to show you that in a second as we change our phenotype and become a very inflammatory or inflammatory secretory cell and create this paracrine effect, recruiting other cells, other stem cells into becoming senescent cells and SASP cells, accelerating that in flow-grade inflammation, accelerating inflammaging, and theoretically or in reality, shortening lifespan, shortening health span, and creating or the increased risk of onset of diseases of aging, diabetes, heart disease, stroke, Alzheimer's, etc. So hallmarks of aging, I kind of reviewed them already. Anyway, it starts out, really we're looking at epigenetic markers, rate of aging, mitochondrial dysfunction, I believe is one of the early onsets of aging. Then we move into DNA damage, kind of concomitantly with mitochondrial dysfunction, and then telomeres erode over time. Leading to cell senescence, we have misfolded proteins, nutrient missignaling, stem cell exhaustion, and chronic inflammation, as I mentioned. So here is the good and bad of cell senescence. In utero, we need our senescent cells. We need a secretory SASP cell in order to heal injury. So if we move that into an adult life, when we have acute injury, we do have a reservoir of healthy SASP cells, or the senescent cell phenotype, that is employed during active or acute injury and help to heal that injury, any aspect of injury. Those are senescent cells we don't want to wipe out. And that's why I lean towards more of a senopreventive program in most of my patients, unless they're older. And there I just interjected how we personalize a senolytic longevity program based on whether you're 35, 40, or 65 or 70. Because most assuredly, we're going to have more senescent cells in the older age group than we do in the younger age group. And I want to maintain or decrease that senescent cell burden while I'm preventing healthy stem cells, for example, from transitioning into senescent cells and then accelerating the aging process again. So we're going to look at replicative senescence, telomere shortening, oxidative stress, age-related cell senescence, and that's the focus, obviously, of a longevity program. Now, I've been at this quite a few decades, and rewind 20 years, and I was thinking, okay, when do we really start aging? You go through the literature and say, okay, we're in a developmental phase till we're 25. Now we know with epigenetic expression or epigenetic testing, we start aging right as soon as we're born. At least those markers are there. How they become clinically manifest is different in every person, and those influences I already reviewed based on lifestyle, et cetera. So the replicative senescence is responsible for cell dysfunction, homeostasis or lack of homeostasis or loss of homeostasis in systems of the body that lead to skeletal muscle dysfunction, sarcopenia, frailty, and all the rest on the list that I just mentioned. Lower left corner, again, reiterate that I believe immunosenescence may be the most important driver behind senescence in every system of the body. There is some literature coming out now that I used to think that only immune system is pervasive. We're going to have immune cells in every system of the body. It's going to have a paracrine effect that is going to affect the health and the onset and the number of senescent cells in other systems. Skin also, believe it or not, and I do a lot of aesthetics, so I read quite a bit on skin health, but if we look at the structure of skin, it's actually a neuroendocrine organ, but it also, there's some literature coming out now that the senescent cells of fibroblasts, when we do biopsies and measure P16, P21 markers of cell senescence, that they seem to have influence on other systems of the body like the immune system. Just a little aside, that's the latest that I'm chasing right now, if you will, or pursuing in terms of understanding the impact I need to have, or do I need to control cell senescence in a fibroblast in the skin to affect a better outcome in a longevity program. Don't know the answer to that, but every time we put stem cells into a stem cell facelift, am I doing some good systemically in other systems of the body? Don't know yet. So there's a SASP cell, as I mentioned. It's a change in phenotype. It's very inflammatory, contributes to inflammation and age-related disease. Those are the bad boys on the block, as I mentioned. So already, senescent cells, there are phenotypic and genotypic changes. There's paracrine signaling, as I mentioned. So the more senescent cells we have, we accelerate the aging process because we're producing more inflammation. Think about, reflect on yourself. Okay, I went from age 20 to age 30. I didn't see much change, maybe a little wrinkle here or there. 30 to 40, things start to accelerate a little bit more. Now I start getting gray hair and can't keep my muscle mass on. 50 to 60, we get older and older and older, quicker and quicker and quicker, in my opinion. I believe a lot of it is contributed to the Senescence burden. There's a SASP cell, it's just another descriptor of there's metabolic reprogramming. It's a different phenotype that pours out TNF alpha, IL-6, interleukins are all inflammatory that affect the environmental milieu, if you will, of other stem cells in a stem cell niche, for example, recruiting them to become SASP cells. They want to recruit them into that army, if you will. So age and immunosenescence, as I mentioned, act as a secondary inducer of senescence within other tissues. It's just an expanded thought of why immunosenescence might have a significant impact on other systems of the body. Because if we start affecting natural killer cells, T cells, and B cells, for example, I'm not going to go through that list on the implications on the right, but you can go over it and go, yeah, this has a huge impact on homeostasis throughout the body. And just a little bit different way of looking at it. Most importantly, the immunosenescence impacts our medullary microenvironment in immune cell production from our bone marrow, the ineffectiveness of anatomical barriers, onset of changes in DAMPs and PAMPs that impact our metabolic pathways, and then the production of cytokines and inflammatory markers. So is the immune system the master switch of aging? Well, at least one study where they took our lab animal mercenaries here and they adjusted their DNA so they would accelerate the aging process. And they looked at P16, P21 and other organs of the body and in every other system. And it turned out that there was an increase in senescent cell markers P16 and P21. Damage caused by reactive oxygen species and metabolic processes, and increase in immune senescent cells and burden in other systems of the body just by changing the immune or the hematopoietic cells, the blood cells and immune cells in these lab animals. There was another arm of this, and this was about a year ago. This was actually published. So we know there was a result of loss of function and structure of solid organs. There was an increase in gain of function of senescent cells outside the immune system, which led to basically inflammation and premature death or shortened lifespan for these in this study. There was a human arm to this study that looked at rapamycin or the rapalogs that reversed the immune senescence in these other systems of the body of markers of P16, 20, and P21, and rapamycin improved the immune function in this study, looking at the response to vaccines. So that is a very positive outcome, if you will, as small as this study was. And just kind of reiterating, one of the markers of immune senescence is CD4-CD8 ratio, and they did have an increased or improved balance of CD4-CD8 to a younger, healthier state. The response to vaccines increased by 20%. All good outcomes based on decreasing mTOR by the rapalogs. So, senolytics, science of applications of agents that really block apoptosis. So we or inhibit the pathways that do not allow apoptosis. So we want to increase apoptosis. We want to destroy these bad boys on the block, these bad senescent cells or these bad SAS cells. But note, there is one study. So I lean towards xenoprevention. One study, it was an animal study, but it looked at identifying in the endothelium structural senescent cells, SASP cells, that are good. Do we destroy those cells with a senolytic? I'm not totally convinced. You'll see the FOXO4-DRI, which is still in research. It targets 100%, replicative senescence, but I'm not convinced. It's so early that using a pure senolytic, although every time we use senolytics, whether it be a flavonoid like fisetin or the dasatinib, for example, another study, human study, looking at targeting cell senescence, senolytics and apoptosis, everything got better. Nothing went wrong. Everything improved. All the markers of cell senescence or management of them improved. So when we actually employ senolytics, we decrease cell senescence, we preserve cell function, mitochondrial function increases, we get decrease in ROS and mTOR, telomere erosion stops and can even be reversed, and then we get immune modulation. So where do peptides come in all this with the last 12 minutes I have? We're not going to look at Yamanaka. I'd love to talk to you about that, but that is epigenetic reprogramming. There's a modified, it just was published in March. Here I am talking about it. Sorry, I'm going off on a tangent here. But the original studies, Yamanaka therapies actually reversed epigenetic aging so much that there was an increased risk of cancer. Now there's a modified version of that actually can reverse your epigenetic age to a point not as far back to an embryonic stem cell and reverse the aging process, at least from an epigenetic perspective. So if we look at peptides, they're really focused then on maintaining young cells so they don't get old. If we have an old cell, I don't want that old cell to transition into a senescent cell. And that's where the focus of my programs, at least with peptides right now that we're talking about, impact, or I think have the best and safest impact for my patients. Just an expanded, know that this is not just about peptides and senolytics. It's all about lifestyle and comprehensive programs that employs everything from nutraceuticals to lifestyle, sleep, stress, exercise, etc. Being an exercise physiologist way back when I was at Cooper Clinic in Dallas back in the 90s, Myokines exercise is a potent senolytic. You can't get around that. If you want to employ an effective senolytic program in longevity, this is key. Because I love this slide and this is probably half the things that happen or are produced in a positive, beneficial way from skeletal muscle when we exercise. And the type and time of exercise is extremely important. Okay, that's all I'll say about lifestyle right now because we don't have the time. So the components of a senolytic program are far-reaching beyond what I am presenting today. I think everybody knows about peptides now. We've been talking about them a lot of years, teaching, understanding peptides to a greater degree, how they work. We know there are 50 to 100 amino acids by definition. There's over 7,000 of them. They're very pleiotropic, and they're cell signaling proteins essentially. But they run pretty much everything in the human body, every system in the body, and every pathway, or they have an influence on them. Just another way of presenting how pleiotropic peptides and the effectiveness they can be in a regenerative medicine practice or a longevity practice. We're going to focus on longevity, mitochondrial health, and stem cells. And this is the select group of peptides that I'm going to present to you today in the last 10 minutes. And One is the senolytic peptide, as I mentioned, the immunomodulating peptides, and then preventive senolytic peptides such as the GHRP, GHRH, the secretagogues. And I'm not going to get into copper peptide, but know that copper peptide is one of the few peptides that has been studied with over 4,000 published data that look at copper peptide and its influence on our DNA and expression of DNA, turning off cancer genes and turning on anti-aging genes. So even though it wasn't on my list, it's got stuck in there. So know that it is part of my programs, and the copper peptide can have a significant influence on your DNA expression. And then the mitochondrial peptides. So FOXO4-DRI, all the way to the bottom left-hand corner, you see it sneaking in over there. FOXO4-DRI has blocks FOXO4, allows P53 to move into that senescent cell over on the upper right-hand corner under cellular and creating or inducing apoptosis. This is research. I don't think there are any human studies. If anybody knows of one, let me know. But as I mentioned, or I didn't mention, this was published in 2017 by a brilliant guy, De Keyser, out of the Netherlands. And young guy, I think he was 36 at the time. But the point is, he did a mouse study that had extreme changes, beneficial changes in aged mice and reversing their aging process. And everybody shows this photo of the rat or the mouse with losing hair, gray hair, looking old, didn't exercise, and then restoring that healthy coat on the animal. They improved their exercise. They exercise more. Their memory improved. All the testing they do in lab animals, everything improved across the board. Did an extended study and actually showed that FOXO4-DRI in lab animals can restore Leydig cells. So now we have, parallel to, if you're going to use this, if we have anybody in andropause, for example, would that restore some Leydig cell and testosterone production? I haven't experienced that, or I haven't even tried it, but I just wanted to let you know what the literature is showing recently. So now we get into preventive xenoprevention. In other words, maintaining a healthy cell, its function, its structure, its ability to maintain its state of health, rather than transitioning into a senescent cell. And the thymic peptides are extremely important and have a big impact on maintaining that integrity. So thymus alpha-1, it's a 28 amino acid peptide. It's very pleiotropic. I'm not going to go into all the applications that are in the literature now, everything from treating cancers to autoimmune diseases to just upregulating the immune system and immune modulation. That's why we use it a lot in, like, for example, Hashimoto and other autoimmune disorders. Works extremely well. What in reality, if I replace or I administer thymosin alpha-1 in my programs to patients that are, let's say, in the later decades of life, they improve their fatigue, their motivation improves, their mindset improves, their memory improves. I don't have any answers to why that happens, other than we're improving inflammation in the brain, but I think that has an impact on the quality of life of patients that I haven't seen really in the literature. Really what we focus on in the literature is Th1, Th2 balance and its application to autoimmune disease, fighting infection, etc., upregulating NK cells. So that's TA1. Short period of time. Sorry, guys, I got to run through these. Thymosin beta-4, 43 amino acid protein. It is found everywhere except red blood cells. It's extremely potent in stimulating healthy cell growth. It does that through regulating actin and the ability of cells to actually divide and move and differentiate. So it promotes healthy stem cells, activates stem cells, key in wound healing. It is all these thymic peptides. We know what the thymus gland does from the time we're 15 to the time we're 55. It atrophies. It starts to, there's involution of the thymic gland, and we have less and less thymus peptides. And when we apply them in a longevity program, we can see that or at least I see anecdotally in my patients, I have a wonderful benefit improving immune vigilance, decreasing inflammation, decreasing senescent cells, using them as xenopreventives, maintaining healthy stem cells and homeostasis. So longevity, it slows senescent cell progress or transition, and it does accelerate to some degree apoptosis of SASP cells, but that's not the key reason I'm using the thymic peptides. And it's also an immunomodulator. So I use both of them quite often in almost every patient because of what I just described. And I think, and they are very effective. Key peptides for longevity program, in my opinion. Then we get into GHRPs and releasing factors that upregulate some growth hormone production, but just as importantly, if you give these peptides before bedtime, that magic hour around 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning where we get this restorative deep sleep, we start restoring and balancing sex hormones. We also release growth hormone, and that's what these secretagogues do. As we age, we still make a lot of growth hormone. We just don't have the ability to release it into the bloodstream at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. If anybody ever had, follow your sleep patterns, like an Oura, I use this ring that follows deep and REM sleep, and it's lockstep. Every decade of life, your deep sleep continues to decrease, and in percentage. And the less deep sleep we have, the less restorative and balancing homeostasis we have at night. Enter the secretagogues that can help stimulate the release of growth hormone at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. That's why we wake up the next day and we have a lot of energy. We don't have a lot of nits and aches and pains, and we wake up and ready to start the day because we've restored and repaired tissue. So these are potent in the fact that the release of a healthy growth hormone balance effectively can preserve the function of our healthy stem cells and preventing them from transitioning into a senescent cell. Upregulating mitochondrial function through PGC1 alpha. I don't want to get into all the geeky cell stuff right now, but it's all out there if you want it. I just tell my audience is enough, so they know how these mechanisms of action work, and they can relay that to their patient, so their patient understands at that level. So it's anti-inflammatory. It improves hippocampal and skeletal muscle regeneration, obviously. So I base my approaches on growth hormone management through, I got 2 minutes, guys, through this trial. This trial is ongoing now. It's in the next phase. I think you guys probably know the TRIM trial by now, looking at men who have immunosenescence in their 60s, and they gave them growth hormone. Know that I practice in 5 states, but in Texas, it is illegal for me to prescribe growth hormone for anti-aging. So I can't use growth hormone in my patients, but I use secretagogues. So they're very effective. But they took growth hormone at a low dose here, added DHEA in, a metformin 500, vitamin D, and zinc. And it turned out when they measured, I think there was 6 markers of epigenetic aging, reversed all of them. Every year they did this study, they reversed their epigenetic aging by 1.5 years. They were reversing aging. But what was fascinating was they did MRIs of the thymus gland, and the thymus gland regenerated to a functional state, restoring vigilance and immune function, which I think is fascinating. But it's not that fascinating. If we go over that list of what I just mentioned, what is the most effective therapy that was in that study that restored thymic function? Was it DHEA? No, that helps block cortisol. Wasn't, maybe a little vitamin D, but it was the growth hormone. So growth hormone is an extremely effective therapy in longevity programs. So I'm going to move on to real quick. I use berberine, by the way. I don't use metformin. Just my preference. The mechanisms of actions are the same in the studies. Preserving mitochondrial function. I'm out of time, but I want to mention the GLPs. I'm going to show I've been around a while. I did the original Baeta studies. I'm probably not supposed to say that, but original studies on GLPs back in 2005. And we knew then, when all these data were coming in on what the GLPs were positively doing and beyond just improving metabolic function and health. And there's the list that you can take a look at, and I broke it down into 4 systems. You're not supposed to be able to read that, but I'll show you'll have the reference in there. You can see the impact it has on pancreas, skeletal muscle, smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, what it does in the liver, and what it does most importantly, in my opinion, in the brain, which I find fascinating. It actually increases BDNF, increases neurogenesis, improves memory, improves brain function. So GLPs are an integral part of a longevity program. Mitochondrial peptides we're not going to get to because I'm a minute over, but know that MOD-SC and something called SS31 are both mitochondrial peptides that support function and slowing the mitochondria from becoming improving mitochondrial function, maintaining mitochondrial number, and maintaining mitochondrial health. Mitochondrial DNA is impacted by damage every day, much greater than nuclear DNA. Know that these mitochondrial peptides can go in and help improve the scarring and the damage to the mitochondrial DNA, which is key, a very key component to longevity. Another thing that does it, I can't get into, but I love it, telomerase activator actually has a huge impact on improving or healing mitochondrial DNA. There's MOD-SC in a nutshell. I'm not going to get into it because I'm 2 minutes over. But there's a summary on it's an exercise mimicker. What you do to mitochondrial function, if you go out and do HIIT training or exercise, MOD-SC actually does the same thing, has the same impact on mitochondrial function as actually physical exercise. Here's a study at extended aging or extended lifespan in a lab animal study. And then I'm going to just touch on the last thing, mitochondrial peptides. There's one study that said if you give somebody the MOD-SC, and you may increase their SASP function and be doing some harm. Medical legally, I save after I do my xenoprevention, wipe out my senescent cells, then I'll employ the mitochondrial peptides, upregulating mitochondrial function, maintaining stem cell health, the healthy ones that are left over. SS31, fascinating mitochondrial peptide. It helps restore mitochondrial function. And Sean's gonna kill me, so I'm gonna stop. But it's also a senolytic inhibitor. Thank you very much.